He has spoken on the topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of StoryPower TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J. Loren Norris.
You ever had that moment where someone is defending you and the story that they're telling for you, about you, to somebody else, maybe it captures their attention, it builds this suspense, it wins them over to your side, but it's not true. I've had it happen in introductions where people have given me credentials that I don't have. People have talked about things that I've done that I've never done. I've had it happen in explanations when there's a conversation that gets a little heated and somebody else steps in thinking they're defending me, but what they have to say about me to the crowd is not even true. There's a challenge with that. But see, here's where it really comes in, because politicians and failed leadership will use this tactic on purpose, because they're doing it for 2 reasons, and that's what I want to talk about today on Leading Leaders. I want you to lead the narrative of your own life, because that story is your experience, not a myth. Today on Leading Leaders. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I'm J. Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and it really is a challenge when someone else is using your story as their fodder. Now, if you've ever been in that place and you realize that your reputation, your life experiences, your struggles are what they're using for their own gain. They're telling a story about you because their relationship to you or their service for you or their sacrifice for you makes them look wonderful. But if your story wasn't tragic enough, they've got to embellish just a little bit because it makes them look better. I mean, what good is it to be a hero to somebody who hasn't really had an issue? And yet, the irony is, most of the time that someone's doing that, manipulating your story to be used for their own glory, their own gain, what they're doing is magnifying parts of the story that to you are less important, and they're minimizing parts of the story that are the most important. Why? Because they're leading a narrative. They're using your story to lead their own narrative. See, the challenge we have when we let go of our story, when we don't tell our own story, is that somebody else will tell it for you. They'll tell it for you, and they'll tell it about you, and they'll use you for their own gain by telling your story in a way that only suits them best. We only have to look back through history at all of the issues. I mean, here's just one example. You know that Rosa Parks was not the first person to refuse to sit at the back of the bus. Nope, she wasn't. In fact, in my first book, Live a More Excellent Life, there's a whole chapter on challenging the status quo. And I mentioned the young lady who was the first one of notoriety to refuse to sit on the back of the bus. But they couldn't use her story in the narrative for the civil rights movement because, well, she had a bit of a reputation already. In fact, part of the reason she refused to sit in the back of the bus was because she was pregnant. And that's part of the scandal. Part of the story nobody wanted to tell was that she was pregnant by a white man who was in office at the time. Yeah, he was an elected official and white and impregnated a young teenage girl who was not white. And she refused to sit on the back of the bus as a woman of color because she felt like she shouldn't have to. I agree with her, she shouldn't have to. But her story wasn't going to get elevated to the national acclaim of a Rosa Parks because there were elements of her story that didn't suit the narrative. See, I know this to be a fact. There are things about your life, there are things about your story that are powerful, that are true, that are experiences that you have lived through that need to be told. But they don't satisfy the narrative of a lot of people. And so they would be glad to hunt and peck parts of your story. One of the challenges that some of my coaching clients have encountered and peers of mine have encountered is that they want to talk about what they're working on now. They want to talk about their books. They want to talk about their current offerings. They want to talk about the changes that they're seeing in other people's lives because of the work that they do. And yet, because they have a bit of a past, they've done things in the past or been victims of things in the past, anytime they get a media interview, that's the only thing that comes up. Anytime they have an opportunity to be in front of a camera to tell their story, it's not the great stuff they're doing now that becomes magnified. No, they want to talk about the tragedies of the past. They want to talk about how they've been victimized or taken advantage of. And I'm telling you right now, there are reasons that people do that. They want to manipulate your story because, well, number one, if they can find the angle of your story that makes them look more like a hero, there's money in that. There's money in that. You know, I have this constituent who is a single mother of 5 and she's really struggling to get education for all of her kids, and so I want to pass this bill that allows these kids to all get an education. They shouldn't be stopped just because their mother is a single mom and can't afford the education. Okay, legitimate cause, perfectly fine. What is the reason that she is a single mom though? And what kind of plight has she been through? And what has she been through? Is she a single mom because the father of her children was killed in an assault or taken by police? Or what are the causes? What is the real story behind the story that you're not telling us? Yeah, great, you're doing good things for the kids. You're offering an education for them, but have you really solved the problem that caused the problem that you're solving? See, that's the challenge. The other aspect of that, though, is sometimes the story that they're not telling you is the most important part. It just makes them look bad. So how they manipulate that story really is the challenge. But it's your story. It's not a myth. It's not a fable. It's not an illustration for a politician or someone else to use. It's your story. And it should be told in truth. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. See, one example of this idea of how we manipulate the data, we manipulate the facts for the purpose of the cause. In Amsterdam, probably 30 years ago, one of the challenges they had was a really high level, really high percentages of underage sex crimes. Criminals who are engaging in sexual activity with minors. And they didn't like the fact that that's what they were known for. Nationally, the red light district was known for this kind of behavior, and people would come from all over the world who had a proclivity to this kind of behavior, and the crime rate was just soaring. It was crazy over the top kind of a crime rate. But the politicians realized this is going to hurt our tourism, this is going to hurt our standing in the world, this is going to hurt our cash flow. And so rather than making stricter laws or harsher punishments or making it uncomfortable for people to come there and practice that kind of crime, they made it no longer a crime. Yeah, they lowered the age of consent to such a level that you got to really be a deviant to practice what is illegal in that space. Well, the numbers now look great. Crime has gone down 90% because all of those people who are practicing those things, well, they're just not criminals anymore. It's not that they're not practicing those things. It's not that those things are no longer good or bad in the eyes of the public or morality or anything of that nature. It just means that there aren't as many criminals because what they're doing is no longer considered a crime. It's the narrative. Now, if you're an underage person in that area and you become a victim of that kind of sexual crime, you become a victim of that kind of perpetrator who has traveled across the globe to come to that place because they know not only can they possibly find what they're looking for, but they're probably not going to get in trouble for it either. If you're a victim of that, well, that's your story. You see how that double-edged sword happens, though. They're not only manipulating the story to make themselves look better, but they're making sure that your story is silenced because, well, your story doesn't make them look better. I'm going to tell you across the board, whether you're talking about religious experiences or relational experiences, it happens in the family courtroom on a regular basis where the mother or the father has a different story than the other spouse, and they want to tell a different story than the other spouse. And the one who has the most dominant story, the most convincing story, the best way to tell the story, the best articulation of the story is usually the one that's believed, especially when there's no evidence, such as tapes or audio recordings or video recordings or handwritten notes. If there's no evidence to prove one way or the other, then the most convincing story is going to be the one that is the believed story, and there will be laws made, whether it's restraining orders or child support or alimony or removal of custody. There will be decisions made based on the quality of the story. Whether it's true or not may be hard to ascertain. So why do I say that you've got to lead the narrative by telling your own story? Because you may become the victim of somebody else telling your story better than you tell your story. And they might add some factors that serve them well and don't serve you well at all. And they may remove some factors that serve them well and don't serve you at all. Because that's how the storytelling process works when you move it to a metaverse, where the reality is the perception and not always the truth. Let that settle in for a minute. When you move it to the metaverse, where the reality is the perception and it's not always the truth, the way you tell your story, the truth about your story, the elements of your story that are highlighted or dismissed will make all the difference in the world. And we're coming to a day when the manipulated narrative has a whole lot more prominence than the truth. It's why I keep old books, as far back as I can find them, as old as I can find them, fiction and nonfiction, historical fact, and just this is the way life was looked at then. Why? Well, because the narrative is changing and perceptions are being smeared, smudged, like glasses that have been dipped in gravy. It's going to be really hard to see the truth. And the more we find that to be true, especially in the world of social media and other virtual or augmented realities, the more necessary your story will be. Your story, told in a truthful way, in a compelling way, in a provocative way, in a way that gets people's attention to realize that is the truth. That's your experience. That's not just some made-up thing. That's what you actually lived through. I still think of Jafar and the genie. When he said, "You realize you can't kill a genie." He said, "No, but you'd be amazed what you can live through." That's the narrative of your life. That's the narrative that your story helps to create. And the more true that narrative is, the more realistic that narrative is, the less myth and fantasy and manipulated reality that you can conjure up. The more truth there is, the better off all of our society will be as we carry forward into eternity with stories that tell the truth about who we are and who we were. Your story matters. If you don't take the time to lead the narrative, somebody else is going to use your story for their own benefit. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, or Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.